Hi, and welcome to another edition of Talking Books with Shonna. This week, I'm going to focus on some books that are either Shakespeare retellings or books that were inspired by Shakespeare in some way. And the reason for that is that this week is the anniversary of Shakespeare's birthday. We don't know the exact date that he was born. What we know, he was baptized on April 26th, and his birthday is generally celebrated on April 23rd. Hi, Brenda. And so that was 1564 that he was born, and Shakespeare died on the same date, April 23rd, in 1616. So, like I said, the books that I'm going to look at are some Shakespeare retellings in modern form, and some books that were inspired by Shakespeare. And so one of the series of books that I'm going to go through is a series that was launched a few years ago by Hogarth, the publisher, Hogarth Press, and they decided to do a project to retell works by William Shakespeare for a wider audience. And to do that, Hogarth Press commissioned several well-known writers to select a play and then reimagine that play in some kind of modern form. And so I'm going to talk about the 7 books that are in that series and then go on to discuss a couple of others. So one of the books in that series is by our own Canadian Margaret Atwood, and it is called Hag-Seed. And I probably don't need to introduce Margaret Atwood to you, but she was born in Ottawa and grew up in Northern Ontario, Quebec, and here in the Toronto area. She's a novelist, a poet, a literary critic, an essayist, an activist, a teacher, and an inventor. She's won numerous awards, including the Booker Prize and the Governor General's Award, and she's the author of more than 35 volumes of works. This book, Hag-Seed, focuses on a couple. So Felix is deposed as the artistic director of the Makeshewig Theatre Festival by his devious assistant and longtime enemy, and then his production of The Tempest is cancelled, and he is heartbroken. And so you can see the tie to The Tempest just from that description. So Felix is reduced to a life of exile in rural southern Ontario, and he's accompanied in his exile by his fantasy daughter, Miranda, who died 12 years earlier. And he devises a plan for retribution. So eventually, Felix takes a job teaching literacy through theater to the prisoners at the nearby Burgess Correctional Institution. And he's making a pretty decent success of it when an auspicious happening places his enemies within his reach. And the help of their own interpretations, some digital effects, and the talents of a professional actress and choreographer, the group that he has put together, the Burgess Correctional Players, prepare to video their version of The Tempest. And of course, given their situation, they view Caliban as the character that they have the most in common with. But Felix has another twist in mind, and so he's planning a very interactive and illusion-driven version of The Tempest, and he's doing it to enact revenge. And this imaginary daughter of his, who is the ghost of his daughter in a sense, Miranda, will also play a role in this new play. So that book obviously is inspired by The Tempest, and it's a bit of a modern retelling of it, and that is Hag-Seed by Margaret Atwood. So another of the authors that was asked to participate in this Hogarth Shakespeare project is Jeanette Winterson, and she's a British novelist born in Manchester, and she grew up in Accrington in the north of England, and she worked as an assistant at a publisher until she came out as a novelist herself. And back in the 1980s, she was named one of the 20 best of young British writers. And her work is currently published in several languages, and she's won numerous awards for it. So her book in this series is called The Gap of Time, and it's based on The Winter's Tale, which is one of Shakespeare's later plays. And The Winter's Tale tells the story of a king whose jealousy results in the banishment of his baby daughter and the death of his beautiful wife. Eventually, his daughter is found and brought up by a shepherd on the Bohemian coast, and then there's a series of events that bring father, daughter, and eventually mother too, to a reunion. In Jeanette Winterson's version of this, The Gap of Time, we move from London, which is a city that is reeling after the 2008 financial crisis, to a storm-ravaged American city called New Bohemia. And this story is one of childhood friendship, but also money and status and technology and the elliptical nature of time. It's a story about the consuming power of jealousy on one hand and the redemption and enduring love of a lost child on the other. And so that's her contribution to this, The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson. The next author that was part of this series is Anne Tyler. And Anne Tyler is an American author, born in Minneapolis and grew up in Raleigh. This book is quite a different one for her. She has more than 20 novels, and she has won the Pulitzer Prize for one of them, for Breathing Lessons, which came out in the late 80s. So here she has picked Taming the Shrew as her novel, and it is called Vinegar Girl. And so she has this character, Kate Batista, and Kate feels very stuck in her life. She's ended up running a house for her eccentric scientist father and her uppity, pretty younger sister, Bunny. But she's always in trouble at work as well, and she is a teacher, and she teaches preschool. And while the little kids adore her, their parents don't always appreciate her unusual opinions and her very forthright manner. Her father, Dr. Batista, has a number of other problems. He's really been, he's an academic, but he's been on the fringes of academia, and he's on the verge of a breakthrough that could benefit millions of people. But his young assistant, who's quite brilliant, Piotr, is about to be deported, and without this assistant, he thinks all would be lost. So he cooks up this outrageous plan that will enable Piotr to stay in the country, and as usual, he expects Kate to fulfill a role in his plan. And she is quite angry with his plan and feels that he's asking too much of her. But the two men gang up on her to bring her around to this plan. So that is Vinegar Girl by Anne Tyler, based on Taming of the Shrew. The next author that was included in this series is Howard Jacobson. And Howard Jacobson was born in Manchester, England, and educated at Cambridge. And he has many novels under his wing. A couple of them were longlisted for the Man Booker Prize. And he's also a respected critic and a broadcaster. And he writes a weekly column for the Independent newspaper. He focuses his story here on a character that reappears in a couple of Shakespeare plays, but his is the interpretation of The Merchant of Venice, and he focuses on Shylock, and his book is called Shylock is My Name. So here, this story takes place in winter, and most of the action takes place in a cemetery. And he juxtaposes the present-day counterpart, Shylock, in the character of art dealer and a conflicted father, Simon Strulovich. And with many of Jacobson's work, irony plays a big role in his writing. And here he presents Shylock as a man of incisive wit, as well as deep passion, who is also concerned with questions of identity, parentage, anti-Semitism, and revenge. And so the other man, Strulovich, he has struggled to reconcile himself to his daughter Beatrice's betrayal of her family and her cultural heritage as she is carried away by the excitement of the high society of Manchester. And she has fallen into the arms of a footballer who is notorious for giving a Nazi salute on the field. So Shylock alternates grief for this situation, as well as rage against his own daughter's rejection of her Jewish upbringing. And so this has some little bits of twists, particularly in regards to the theme of the infamous pound of flesh from The Merchant of Venice. And of course, it has the strong theme of Jewish identity running through it as well. And because Howard Jacobson is himself Jewish, he found it both challenging but also troubling and inspiring in a very interesting way. So this is Shylock is My Name by Howard Jacobson, his interpretation of The Merchant of Venice. The next person who was asked to write for this is from quite a different background, and he writes crime books, and that is Jo Nesbo, who's the Norwegian author and musician, who was born in Oslo and grew up in Molde. Nesbo graduated from the Norwegian School of Economics, and he's most famous for his books with a series featuring the detective Harry Hole, which can be quite dark. But he's also the main vocals and songwriters for a Norwegian rock band called De Der. And this book that he decided to write in response to the challenge is called Macbeth, just like the play it is inspired by. And his Macbeth is set in Scotland in the early 1970s. And Macbeth is an inspector, and he's a very good policeman, but he's in a situation where a drug bust turns into a bloodbath. And it is up to Inspector Macbeth and his team to clean up the mess. Now, he's got a bit of a dark past. Inspector Macbeth is also an ex-drug addict with a troubled past. And there is a woman of interest, Lady, in this book, and she is the ambitious owner of a casino. So they aren't actually married, but they definitely have a relationship here. And some of the readers that reviewed this book said that they were initially interested in seeing how Nesbo adapted the Shakespearean plot points to the tale that he created in the 1970s, but they ended up being so interested in the world that he created that took over their interest. So that's a great compliment, I think, to him. So Inspector Macbeth is plagued by hallucinations and paranoia, and one of the interesting elements that I liked to hear about this is he's interpreted the witches in a very interesting way. They are technicians cooking up street drugs in his book, and one of the street drugs they come up with is an eerie, freaky mind bender of a drug called brew. So quite an interesting take on the whole witch situation. So that is Macbeth by Jo Nesbo. And the next book that is in this series is by Tracy Chevalier. And you might probably know her for her historical book, Girl with a Pearl Earring. She was born in Washington, D.C. Her father actually was a photographer for the Washington Post. But after her undergraduate degree, she moved to England, initially temporarily, but she ended up making a life there. And she has written quite a few books, a lot of them historical fiction. And the one that she decided to take on here is Othello. And her book based on Othello is called New Boy. And here we have a book that's set in a suburban schoolyard. This young boy is arriving at his 5th school in 5 years. He's a diplomat's son from another country. His name is Ose Kakato, and he knows that he needs to have an ally if he's able to survive in his school. So he's lucky enough to hit it off with Dee, who's the most popular girl at the school, but another student really can't stand to see that budding relationship. And so young Ian decides to destroy the friendship between this new black boy and the golden girl. And by the end of the day, all happens within one day, the whole school is involved in this situation, and it will never see it again. So it all, as I said, takes place in a suburban Washington schoolyard where kids have these quick relationships, falling in and out of each other, out of love with each other, just during one recess period. And there's a casual racism that is picked up by from the adults in their lives, parents and teachers. And these kids are 11 years old, so they're really at that age where they're sort of experimenting with who they're becoming as more adult people. And so it's a drama of friends that are torn apart by jealousy, bullying, and betrayal. So that is New Boy by Tracy Chevalier, based on Othello. And the last book in the Hogarth Shakespearean series is by Edward St. Aubyn, and he is also an English writer, born in London in 1960, and educated at Westminster and at Oxford. And he has, I think, 6 novels now, some of which were shortlisted for the Man Booker or other awards. And this book is called Dunbar by and it is based on King Lear. And here the character Dunbar says, I really did have an empire, you know. Have I ever told you the story of how it was stolen from me? And that sets the plot for his Lear-like play. So his name is Henry Dunbar, and he had been the powerful head of a global company, but his life has not gone well lately. He's in his dotage, and he has handed over the care of the company that he created to his two eldest daughters, Abby and Megan. But the relationship between him and these daughters has not gone well. It's become a very bitter relationship, and it has him doubting the wisdom of some of his past decisions. So he's now in a care home in the Lake District, and he has only a demented alcoholic comedian as his sort of companion there. And so he starts planning his escape. And when he flees into the nearby hills, his family must go after him. But you're not sure who's going to end up finding him first. Either his younger daughter, who's still beloved to him, Florence, or the more mercenary Abby and Megan. They're keen to take over the rest of his possessions. So quite an interesting take on the whole Lear thing. So that is Dunbar by Edward St. Aubyn. So another couple of books that are sort of inspired by Shakespeare are two books in a series by Jennifer Lee Carrell. And these are two of the three books that she's written. Besides these two books, she also wrote a history about the creation of the smallpox vaccine called The Speckled Monster, which also interests me for sure, especially given our vaccine times. So Jennifer was born in Washington and grew up in Arizona, but she has degrees from both Stanford and Oxford, and she has taught and done some writing at Harvard. She's also been a writer for the Arizona Daily Star and the Smithsonian Magazine. The first book in her two-book series around Shakespeare is called Interred with Their Bones, and this book is a very sort of high-paced thriller along the lines of a book like, say, Da Vinci Code. There's a quest for a long-lost object, a man and a woman previously unknown to each other working together towards this goal, along with some help from a few other people, along with lots of murders, lots of travel, and lots of action. So the main character here is Kate Stanley, and Kate is currently directing Hamlet at the Globe Theatre in London, and she's visited there by her academic mentor, whose name is Roz Howard. Roz has found something big and wants Kate's help to find it. But later on that same day, Roz is found dead in the theater, and Kate feels that someone is stalking her. So the prize that the two women were after is Shakespeare's long-lost play, Cardenio. And the clues that Kate finds in it take her back to North America before bringing the action back to England. She just barely stays one step ahead of the killer, and she has to use all of her Shakespearean knowledge to figure out where to head next. So the book deals not only with the lost play Cardenio, but also with the identity of Shakespeare himself, bringing up a lot of the different theories around the playwright's identity. And Kate is a very interesting character and gives us never a dull moment. The Shakespeare element is very strong, and there's an author's note at the end of the book that talks about the elements of truth that are contained in the book, which was also a very interesting read for me. The second book in that series continues along the Shakespearean line with the same character, Kate Stanley, in the main role here, and it is called Haunt Me Still, and it is based on the play Macbeth. And this one, Kate Stanley is meeting with a very wealthy Scottish woman, Lady Nairn, who wants her to direct a very special production of Macbeth in Scotland. And Lady Nairn was a famous actress several years before, but she retired when she met and married a Scottish lord. And she is now widowed, but wants to mount the production to carry out her late husband's wishes to showcase his Macbeth collection. Lady Nairn is also the guardian of her granddaughter Lily, who is a 50-year-old girl whose parents have died fairly recently, and she's very vulnerable to people that would take advantage of her yearning for her parents. So there's a lot of information here that is drawn from the legends about the play Macbeth, what is known about the play's origins, and the real history not only of Macbeth, but also of a later Scottish noble that Shakespeare could have had contact with, whose name was Elizabeth Stuart. She was a Countess of Arran. And I really liked how Jennifer Lee Carrell mixes the real with the legend and the literature. She also uses in this book pagan ritual, the religion of Wicca, and the use of darker magic that is erroneously connected to the white magic of Wicca. It was also really interesting to see real depictions of the religion along with the myths that many mischaracterize with it. This book is a battle of good and evil, with those who are acting in terms of greed, revenge, or self-aggrandizement up against the side of good, which Kate personifies with her knowledge and her expertise in Shakespeare and Elizabethan drama that take her in the right direction for this role. So again, it's a very fast-moving plot and a real page-turner of a book. So those two books are Interred with Their Bones and Haunt Me Still by Jennifer Lee Carrell. The next book that I'm going to talk about is inspired a little bit by Macbeth as well, and it is called The Weird Sisters by Eleanor Brown. And Eleanor Brown is an American novelist, anthologist, editor, teacher, and speaker who now lives in Colorado. And this book follows three sisters. They're the Andreas sisters, Rosalind, who goes by Rose, Blanca, who goes by Bean, and Cordelia, who goes by Cordy. And their father is a Shakespearean scholar and a professor at a college in their town in Ohio. And the women are all in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're all at turning points in their lives. Rose has always been the daughter who did what was expected of her. She got her doctorate, and she became a professor of mathematics at a college close to home. She's recently become engaged and is planning her wedding. Her fiancé, Jonathan, is doing a visiting scholarship or professorship at Oxford University and is really urging her to join him there. But she really wants to stay where her family is, but particularly because her mother has been recently diagnosed with breast cancer. Bianca, on the other hand, has always had her eyes on the big city and wants to make it big there. And she made a beeline for New York City, and she's been working there as an office manager and has recently undergone some setbacks, losing her job and finding herself under financial pressure. She's decided that she has to come back to her small town in Ohio to regroup. Cordy is more of a wanderer. She has moved around the country, picking up odd jobs just to get by, and doing what she feels she needs to find a job and a meal. She's just realized that she's pregnant, and she doesn't know what she wants to do about that situation yet. But she realizes that she can't continue the life she's living. It's just not sustainable with her current situation. So Rose tries to take charge and organize everyone else, but she is so scared of taking risks herself and going outside of her comfort zone in her own life that this summer is going to make a big difference for her. Bean is forced to find a job and evaluate her own motivations as she deals with the financial responsibility she has and the bad decisions that she's made. Cordy also needs to find a job to support herself, and she has to look inside herself to find out what her strengths are instead of just running like she's been doing. So all sisters here are sort of going through a coming of age moment, and one of the things about the way that Shakespeare's involved here, with the father being a Shakespearean scholar, is the family uses quotations from Shakespeare as a kind of language with each other to question, to comfort, and to challenge each other, which I found was really neat. It's kind of like a little secret language amongst them. So that is The Weird Sisters by Eleanor Brown. The next book I'm going to talk about is one that came out more recently, and that is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And Maggie O'Farrell is a British author. She's done a memoir as well as 8 novels. And I know I first read her The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox, which is a fantastic read. And highly recommend that one. So she lives in Edinburgh. And this book, Hamnet, imagines the personal life of William Shakespeare and his family in a very new way, focusing the story mostly on his wife and his children. So the book jumps from 1596, when Hamnet, Shakespeare's son, died at the age of 11, back to the earlier 1580, with William first meeting his wife, Agnes. In real life, sometimes his wife is referred to as Agnes and sometimes as Anne, so there is some confusion among her name in reality. So we see their courtship, their marriage, and their growing family. In the real history of Shakespeare's family, the cause of his son Hamnet's death is not given in any histories that have been found, but the plague was a very active disease at the time, and the theaters that were showing Shakespeare's play usually closed for a few months in plague season during summer throughout the country. And so it shows from William when he first met Agnes, when he was tutoring Latin and still living at home with his parents. And we see how their courtship, which wasn't really approved of by either family, but sort of came about through secret meetings. Agnes is also a very interesting character, a very independent woman. She kind of manages her own business, growing things, and doing a little bit of sort of naturopathic medicine on the side, using the herbs and plants that she learned about from her own mother. And she also has bees that she gets honey from. And she's a very strong personality and more than an equal to her husband. She also has a bit of a sixth sense and can sometimes foretell the future or feel how things should happen. And she senses the challenges that her husband has, and even though it doesn't suit what she would prefer, she urges him to go to London for the future of his plays and his playwright career. And then she has to deal with the family at home. And then we see the young boy, Hamnet, who's a very exuberant boy, very close to his twin sister, Judith. And when Judith gets ill, we see how that affects both Agnes and young Hamnet. And Shakespeare doesn't realize, and it takes some time for word to be sent to him for him to come home to his family who needs him during this time. So this book won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, and definitely is a fantastic read. So that's Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. The next books that I'm going to talk about is another series, this time a series of 3 books, and I've actually only read the middle one, but I'm going to talk about the first 2. So the first one is called Fool, and this series is by Christopher Moore, and Christopher Moore is an American writer of absurdist fiction. His books really involve sort of conflicted everyman figures that are struggling through some extraordinary circumstances. There's a lot of very down-to-earth humanity in his books and a ton of humor. And I absolutely love reading him. So I do have somewhere in my library, I haven't located it just yet, a copy of Fool, and I definitely need to get back and read this first book in the series. So here, this book is sort of inspired by King Lear, and it is a take from the fool's point of view, from the jester of the king's point of view. So the fool in this case is named Pocket, and Pocket sees his king in a very different way, and there's a lot of body humor in this, which there were in Shakespeare's plays, because he appealed to that class of people that really enjoyed that type of humor. And this book is an exploration of that story of King Lear from a very different point of view. The next book in this series, which I have read, The Serpent of Venice, I actually listened to the audiobook, which was absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend the audiobook version of this. And it pulls from 3 different works, 2 of them Shakespeare. So it pulls from The Merchant of Venice, from Othello, and from Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. And there's an afterword in the book where he says that he chose the 2 Shakespeare works partly due to their setting in Venice, and he drew character from all 3 of the tales, having some characters take on multiple roles, so the stories kind of overlap with each other. And he adjusted the setting to the 13th century in Venice, around the time of the long war between Venice and Genoa. And again, his main character is the fool from the previous book, Pocket. He has been sent to Venice as an emissary from England, where his king was. And with the death of his queen and his lover, he finds himself a place at court, favorite of the ruler of Venice, the Doge. And Pocket is led into a trap in the cellars of a Venetian estate, and he finds himself the object of interest of a strange creature that he only gradually identifies. And he decides that he has to revenge himself against the people that would murder him, and he must save Venice from a plot that is out to destroy the city. And so his adventures take him to Corsica, where he meets with the General Othello and his new wife, and on to Genoa to rescue his sidekick, another fool named Drool, and his monkey, Jeff. And then going back to Corsica to again interact with Othello as the story of Othello reaches its apex with the plot against him. So there's an interesting sidekick that Pocket has in this book, and that is a young Jewish woman. She's intent on her own escape from the domestic life that her family's planned for her. And they are also joined by a real-life character, Marco Polo, the adventurer. And he plays a key role here as well. And, of course, there's a ghost. So, as Moore says in the text of the book, there's always a bloody ghost. So the plot involves more than just plots and revenge. It also includes love, jealousy, murder, lots of murder, betrayal, a chorus with its own personality, and lots of humor. There's a lot of really sly jests that he uses here, and the reading that was done really made it come alive for me. There's also a third book in this series that's called Shakespeare for Squirrels that takes Pocket to Greece, and it is a retelling of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So then the next book I'm going to talk about is inspired by the story of Juliet, and it is by Anne Fortier. So Anne Fortier was born in Denmark and had a love of languages and adventure that led her to become involved in television and films, and had her move to the United States. And Juliet is her second novel, and it is a historical novel that kind of has two time periods. It follows a young woman who discovers that her family's origins reach all the way back to the real Romeo and Juliet. And so this young woman is 25 years old, and she is Julie Jacobs, and her beloved Aunt Rose has just passed away. And Aunt Rose was like a mother figure to her. But she is shocked when she finds out that her aunt has left her entire estate to Julie's twin sister. And the only thing that Julie has inherited is a key. And it is a key that her mother herself was carrying on the day that she died years before. And it opens a safety deposit box in Siena, Italy. So as Julie travels to Siena, this is a journey that will change her life forever. We see then back in 1340, Giulietta Tolomei, who is recovering in Siena from the slaughter of her parents, and she has met a young man named Romeo, and they end up again having this ill-fated love affair that turns the medieval city upside down and went on to inspire many poets and artists. And as Julie delves into her own family's past and finds the connection with this ancient couple, she also finds the treasure, clues to the treasure that they allegedly left behind. And there becomes a danger that arises around her with superstitions, age-old hostilities, and personal vendettas. And it seems like she needs someone to rescue her, but there is no Romeo for her because his story ended long ago. And so you wonder who will come into her life. So this is, again, a story based on Romeo and Juliet, and it's called Juliet by Anne Fortier. And the last book I'm going to mention is actually a memoir that I just finished and haven't written my review for yet. So this is Juliet's Answer, And it is a memoir by Canadian writer Glenn Dixon, who was a high school teacher who taught Shakespeare for a couple of decades. And when he was having some issues with his personal life, a long, unrequited love for a woman, he traveled to Verona, Italy, which is also associated with Romeo and Juliet. And there is a organization in Verona called the Club di Gioletta, and they started back, I believe, in the 1950s, and they answer letters that people write to Juliet asking for love and life advice. And so he becomes a secretary of Juliet answering these letters, and meets the founder of this club and his daughter, who now runs it, and works through his own issues around love and relationships. So quite an interesting book. And there are many, of course, other stories based on Shakespearean books. Everything from the famous musical West Side Story to other novels. So I hope you explore them, and I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I'll see you back here next Tuesday to talk about books some more. Thanks.